Hello students, today in this video we'll talk about the remaining types of population interaction starting from parasitism, and then we have already completed two types of population interaction, that is predation and competition. So today we will talk about parasitism, and if possible we will try to cover up all the different types of population interaction in this video. So parasitism. So this is a negative interaction. So here, one organisms not only derives nourishment but also lives a part of their life or their whole life on other organisms. So you know that the parasite is an organism that lives in or on another organism, and the host is the one from which parasites obtains food as well as the shelter. This parasitism could be between animals, between plants, or between animals and plants. Now, many parasites have evolved to be host specific. Host specific means a particular parasite, they will parasitize only a particular type of host. That is, they are very specific and then can parasitize only in single species of host. Now, the host and the parasite, both of them, they evolve in such a way that the host will try to evolve some special mechanisms for rejecting or resisting the parasite. To keep away from the parasite, the host will try to do that. And while the parasite will evolve, again they will also undergo evolution, evolving some mechanisms to counteract and neutralize them. That means to overcome the evolution that the host has done in order to reject them, in order to keep them away from them. So the parasite evolves mechanisms to counteract and neutralize them in order to be successful in the same host species. That means if the parasite is not able to overcome or dominate that special characters that the host has evolved, then they will not be able to survive on the host. That is why only species, the parasites, they try to counteract that one, or they try to neutralize that the new mechanisms that the host has evolved. So from there we can see that they are co-evolving. There is a co-evolution between this host and the parasites. Now let us look at some of the adaptations in parasites. As the parasites live in or on the host, they evolve special adaptations like loss of unnecessary sense organs. So since these parasites, many of them, they live inside the body of a host or on the body of the host, so there's no need for them to see or feel or sense the things, external factors. So because they are simply depending on the host for food and then for nourishment, so they don't need these sense organs. They don't need to taste, or they don't need to feel or sense anything. Their job is to only obtain food from the host. So this kind of unnecessary sense organs, they will lose it. So that is the evolution. So they by in time they evolve, and then in that evolution they lose this unnecessary sense organs. The second one is presence of adhesive organs or suckers to cling on to the host. Now in the parasites, you will see that there will be this one, adhesive organs or suckers, so that they can cling or hold on to the host. So adaptations these are the adaptations to survive on the host. Now the third one is loss of digestive system. They are evolving to lose this digestive system, because there's no need for them to digest the food, because they are already taking the digested food only from the host. So this type of digestive system is not really required for them, so they used to omit, or they used to leave behind this kind of system. And then the fourth one is they are highly reproductive. They have a very high reproductive capacity. They can reproduce very rapidly in a very fast way. So these are the adaptations in parasites. Now let us look at the relationship between the host and the parasite. Now if you look at the life cycle of a parasite, they are very often complex. That means they live a part of their life cycle in the primary host, where they cause the disease, and some part of their life cycle in the secondary host, where they mature and undergo important changes, then come back to parasitize in the primary host again. That means they involve one or two intermediate hosts. The human liver fluke is a parasite in the liver of a man. So this parasite needs other two intermediate hosts, that is a snail and a fish, where they will spend the remaining part of their life to complete this life cycle, like just say to get matured, and then they will come back again to the man to parasitize the man. So from here we can see that some of the parasites involve one or two intermediate hosts. Now in the second case, there are some parasites which need a vector. Vector means a carrier in order to spread to other hosts. For example, a malarial parasite in man. So this malarial parasite, that is Plasmodium. So the name of the parasite is Plasmodium. This Plasmodium causes malaria in human beings. So this parasite, they will multiply and then they will thrive very well in the salivary glands of female Anopheles mosquito. That means this Plasmodium will be present in the salivary glands of this female mosquito. So this mosquito acts as a carrier. That means mosquito is going to carry the Plasmodium into the human blood. So when the mosquito bite the human being, this Plasmodium is transferred to the blood of a man, and then they will cause the malaria in the human beings. So this is the relationship of this host and the parasite. Like some of them, they need one or two intermediate hosts, and then some needs a vector, a carrier, in order to spread disease into the other host. Now parasites are of two types, that is ectoparasites and the endoparasite. So ectoparasites are external parasites. That means they live on the host and are generally attached to the skin and hair of the host. Examples are ticks, mites, and the lice of ectoparasites on mammals like dogs. So in the dogs you'll find these lice. All these are ectoparasites. And even this leech also, it is an ectoparasite. That means like they used to feed on the blood of man. And the third type of ectoparasites are these marine fish infected with these ectoparasitic copepods. So these copepods, you will find these copepods on the body of these marine fish. So these are examples of ectoparasites. And Cascara also, it is a parasitic plant. This plant, they parasitize on the hedge plants. That means hedge plants means the plants that we use for as a fencing purpose, or on other plants. So this Cascada, they lose its chlorophyll and its leaf in the course of evolution, and then since they cannot do the photosynthesis, it derives nourishment or nutrition from the other plant or the host plant. The female mosquito is not considered a parasite because this female mosquito feeds on our blood only for reproduction and not for survival. While we know that parasites feed or parasite depend on the host for its survival. But in case of this mosquito, they feed on this human blood not for survival but only for reproduction. That is why it is not considered as a parasite. Now the other type of parasite is endoparasite. So endoparasites live inside the host. They could be a parasite in liver, kidney, lungs, red blood cells, etc. Now, brood parasitism is also one of the fascinating examples of parasitism which takes place in birds. So here what happens, the parasitic bird lays its eggs in the nest of a host bird and then lets the host bird to incubate them or to let them hatch them. So during this course of evolution, what happens, the eggs of the parasite bird, they used to evolve and then they like begin to resemble with the host egg in size and in color, so that they can escape from the host bird detection, because it is just to reduce the host bird from detecting the parasitic egg or the foreign eggs. And then if they can detect it, they might eject them from the nest. So for that reason only, if the parasitic bird's eggs used to get evolved and then resembles with the host egg. So this is also one of the parasitism. That's all about parasitism. Now next type of interaction is commensalism. Till now we have discussed three types of interaction, that is predation, parasitism, and competition. And all these three are negative interaction where one or both the species are harmed. Now commensalism is a positive interaction because here one species is benefited while the other is neither benefited nor harmed. Now let us take some few examples to understand this interaction. Now orchid, which is growing as an epiphyte on the mango branch. Epiphyte means it is a plant that grows on another plant which is not a parasite. Okay, so this orchid grows on a mango branch and barnacles also grow on the back of a whale. So but here orchid and the barnacles, they are getting some kind of benefit, that is they are getting a shelter for them to live, while neither the mango tree nor the whale derives any kind of benefit. That means both the mango tree and then whale do not derive any kind of benefit there. Only this orchid and the barnacles are getting the benefit from this mango tree and whale. So this type of interaction is called commensalism, where one of the species is benefited and the other species is neither benefited nor harmed. Next example is the cattle egret and the grazing cattle. Egret is a small bird that you will find always in a close association with the grazing cattle. Now you will see that these egrets are always forage very close to the cattle, because as the cattle move, they used to stir up and then flush out the insects from the vegetation or from the grasses, and then in that way the egrets are able to get their food. Otherwise, if the bird egret is not close to the cattle, then they will be not able to get the food. It is only because of the grazing cattle, as they move, they are getting the food. That is why here the bird is getting the benefit, and while this cattle is not getting any benefit nor harm. And the last example of commensalism is between the sea anemone and a clownfish. Now this sea anemone has a stinging tentacles, and then this stinging tentacles only gives protection to the clownfish, because some predators, the predators of this fish, they will not come close to these stinging tentacles, and in that way the clownfish gets protection. That means they are getting benefit, while the sea anemone, they are not getting any benefit or harm. Now the last one is mutualism. So from the word itself, we come to understand that mutualism is an interaction where both the species are benefited. The most common example of mutualism is lichens and mycorrhiza. So in lichens, you will find a fungus and a photosynthesizing algae living together and then mutually getting benefit. Similarly, mycorrhiza is also a association between the fungi and roots of higher plants. So these fungi help the plant in absorption of nutrients from the soil, while the plant in turn provides the fungi with energy yielding carbohydrates. That means plants provide the fungi with food. So that is how they mutually get benefited. Now there are some spectacular and evolutionarily fascinating examples of mutualism found in plant and animal relationships. We know that the plants need the help of animals for pollinating their flowers and dispersing their seeds. And in turn, plants offer rewards or fees in the form of pollen and nectar for pollinators and juicy and nutritious fruits for the seed dispersers. This is actually what happens in mutualism, where both the species gets benefit. But then there are some cases where this mutualism is not well practiced. That is, some of the animals, they try to steal the nectar without helping in the pollination. So that is the reason why plant-animal interactions often involve co-evolution. That means the evolution of the flower and its pollinator species is tightly linked with one another. So example, in some species of fig tree, there is a tight one-to-one relationship between the pollinator species of wasp. That means the given fig species can be pollinated only by its partner wasp species and no other species. Here, the female wasp uses the fruit for laying eggs, as well as it uses the developing seeds within the fruit for nourishment of its larva. So the wasp pollinates the fig inflorescence while searching for suitable egg-laying position, and in return the fig offers the wasp some of its developing seeds as food for the developing larva. But not all the mutualists offer reward. Orchids show a diversity of floral patterns just to attract the right pollinator insect like bees and bumblebees and ensure pollination, but do not offer reward. Particularly the Mediterranean orchid offers. They used to employ sexual deceit to get pollination done by the bee. So one of the petals of the orchid resembles the female bee in size, color, and markings. So the male bee is attracted thinking it's a female bee and pseudocopulates, that is false copulation with the flower, and during that process it is dusted with the pollen from the flower. And when the same bee pseudocopulates with another flower, pollination is complete. Now, if the female bee's color pattern change, the orchid flower has to co-evolve and maintain the resemblance of its petal to the female bee. Otherwise, the pollination will not take place. So here we can see the co-evolution between both the species. So with this, we come to the end of this chapter. I hope you all understood. Thank you.